My brother's fiancée looked straight at me across the table and asked, "So what do you do?" Before I could respond, my mom chuckled and said, "Nothing important." 10 seconds later, she fell completely silent because her future daughter-in-law had just searched me online and uncovered things they had no idea about. Hi, I'm Emily, and I've always been the quiet one during family gatherings, but behind the scenes, I was quietly building something significant. That particular dinner changed everything dramatically. If you have ever been underestimated by your own relatives, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you are watching from, because I know many of you have stories similar to mine. Our family dinners were a kind of predictable ordeal, a repeated scene where everyone knew their roles except mine, which were mostly silent. Every few weeks, the inevitable call came, a family dinner at my parents' house in a peaceful suburb of Connecticut. The home was spacious and cozy, filled with the aroma of my mom's cooking, often her famous lasagna. That scent, once a symbol of comfort, now felt heavy and almost suffocating. It carried the weight of expectations, silent judgments, and invisible boundaries that marked each person's place. And my place, it seemed, was always hidden in the shadows. I was Emily Johnson, the youngest, the afterthought, the one whose achievements, if acknowledged at all, were met with a polite nod before the conversation swiftly turned back to My older brother Jake was the golden child, the center around which our small family universe faithfully revolved. He possessed a natural charm and was frustratingly proficient at everything he attempted. His journey through life seemed lined with constant praise and unwavering parental approval. He had excelled in his examinations, secured a well-paying position at a major New York City company, and to seal the image of the ideal son, he was engaged to Grace. Grace was a recent addition to this family drama. From what I observed, she had a warm smile and a calm disposition, and I truly wished she would not become too entangled in the complicated and prickly nature of our family relationships. This evening marked her formal introduction to us all. I knew I should have left Dillon earlier. My modest apartment, with its view of the vibrant cityscape and the distant murmur of traffic, was my refuge. It was a world apart from my parents' perfectly trimmed lawn and the heavy traditional decor of their home. Yet traffic, as it frequently did, seemed to work against me, or perhaps deep inside I always hesitated to return to a place where I felt like a faded portrait, physically present, but never truly acknowledged. So I arrived late, yet again the final guest to come through the door. The dining room had already transformed into a lively stage filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the energetic voice of my mother Karen as she orchestrated the meal's service. She was clearly in her element, the gracious hostess, wearing a carefully perfected mask of maternal warmth. The gentle warmth of Dad Michael was already locked in as he appeared deeply engaged in what seemed like a very serious conversation with Jake, most likely about investments or some business plan. Jake, with Grace sitting closely beside him, resembled a victorious hero, his arm laid casually and possessively over the back of her chair. They painted a perfect picture of a couple on the verge of marital happiness. I noticed the only vacant seat intentionally placed at the far end of the table, directly opposite Grace. It almost symbolized my usual role, present yet detached. "Hi, everyone," I offered my voice as a subtle ripple in the flow of their discussion. A few murmured greetings came my way, mostly just heads turning briefly before quickly returning to more interesting topics. This was normal. I was accustomed to being invisible in these family gatherings. That evening, I had even made an effort, choosing a simple navy blue dress that I thought looked quite elegant. I had spent extra time on my hair, trying to style it with some level of grace. Why did I bother? I often wondered. To them, I wasn't the woman who owned a business, who led a team, who handled intricate deals. I was simply Emily, the quiet one, the person who, in Mom's unforgettable words, played with computers or something. She repeated that phrase so often it became my unofficial family nickname. It was her way of reducing my entire career into something trivial, unimportant, and easy to overlook, something she never truly respected. I struggled to comprehend and therefore could not appreciate it fully. The meal began, plates were filled, and conversations blossomed all around me, a familiar flow I had long learned not to resist. Mom was sharing a story from Jake's school days, narrating a small victory that in her telling sounded as though he had single-handedly saved the entire school production. Dad joined in with his opinions on the current political scene, his voice loud and commanding, allowing no disagreement. Jake and Grace exchanged gentle smiles and whispered remarks, wrapped up in their private world of affection. I concentrated on the food. The green bean casserole was especially tasty this evening, its creamy texture offering a comforting distraction. A small kindness I clung to. I recalled numerous dinners like this one. When I won a national coding competition in college, the response was a mere polite, "Oh, that's nice, dear," before Mom directed the attention back to Jake's upcoming internship interviews. When I secured the initial funding for my startup, a personal milestone I had dreamed of conquering as if climbing a mountain, my attempt to share the news was cut short by Dad asking Jake's opinion on a new car model. These were not acts of outright cruelty, not at all times. Rather, it was a steady wearing away of the spirit, a quiet dismissal sending the unspoken message that my world, my passions, and my successes were simply not on the same level as Jake's, not deserving of the family's limelight. He was the financial genius, the one with a clear, understandable direction. I was the mystery, the one who worked in realms others found hard to grasp. They discovered a world hidden within those computers that seemed confusing and therefore unworthy of attention. Then Grace, with her innocent nature, turned toward me. Her smile radiated warmth, and her eyes shone with genuine interest. "So, Emily," she started, her voice calm and clear, briefly quieting the entire table. "What is it that you do?" Such a simple question, a polite way to get acquainted. In any other place it would have passed unnoticed, but here, at this very table, it struck like a grenade with its pin already pulled. The tension in the air was palpable before I could utter a single word. My mother quickly intervened. Her laugh was sharp and brittle, resembling ice cracking under pressure. "Oh, Emily," she said, looking at Grace with a forgiving smile, as if describing the quirks of a slightly unusual child. "Nothing important, dear. She works online, you know, one of those things." She gestured vaguely with her hand, both embracing the vastness of the digital realm and reducing it to a mere trivial pastime. "She fiddles with computers or something like that. It keeps her occupied, I guess." My face flushed deeply. It was the casual disrespect, the public dismissal of my value that stung every time. After all these years, it still felt like a fresh blow. I caught a brief look of puzzlement in Grace's eyes. She glanced between my mother and me, then back to my mother, as if trying to bridge the gap between the dismissive attitude and the otherwise polite setting. I braced myself, ready with my usual dull, non-committal response. Working in technology was something she preferred to keep low-key, avoiding any actions that might draw extra attention, or even worse, lead to being dismissed. Yet the situation took an unexpected turn. Grace did not let it slide, but instead reached for her phone from the table. Her eyebrows knitted together slightly, a look of deep curiosity mixed with contemplation on her face. Her fingers tapped swiftly on the screen. Suddenly, an unusual silence enveloped the table. Even Dad stopped criticizing the government's newest policy. Jake noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere and halted mid-sentence, his eyes fixed on Grace. Mom observed quietly, her faint smirk suggesting she assumed Grace was simply searching for a harmless party game or something of that sort. Seconds seemed to drag on. I could hear my heart pounding wildly. What was she doing? Surely she would not do such a thing. Grace's eyes scanned the screen intently, then suddenly grew very large. Not slightly, but fully wide open. Her mouth parted, forming a quiet O. She gasped sharply, a crisp sound breaking the stillness like a knife. It was pure, raw shock. She quickly raised her head and locked her gaze onto mine. There was no confusion left in her eyes, only disbelief and another feeling, astonishment. "Wait," she stammered, barely speaking above the hush. She looked back at her phone again, as if to confirm the image before her, then back at me. "Wait a moment. This is you." The silence that followed was overwhelming, heavy and suffocating. Mom's subtle smirk faded into an unreadable expression. The expression vanished, replaced by sheer confusion. Her mouth hung slightly open. Jake's fork, paused midair on its way to his mouth, crashed loudly onto his china plate, the noise ringing out like a gunshot in the quiet room. Dad just stared, his mouth a little agape. Grace, apparently oblivious to the emotional chaos she was stirring around her, turned her phone screen toward me and then tilted it a bit so Jake could see too. There I was, in a professional photo, looking much more self-assured than I ever felt at these family dinners. The caption beneath was sharp, clear, and undeniable. Emily Johnson, the 28-year-old tech entrepreneur revolutionizing the e-commerce world with ClickSmart. Mom's face instantly lost all color. She appeared as though she had seen a spirit. Her eyes flicked from the phone screen to me and back again, as if her mind struggled to absorb the contradictory details. Now fully animated, Grace began reading aloud from her phone, her voice growing stronger and more excited. "Founder and CEO of ClickSmart Solutions," she declared, glancing at me for affirmation. "Your company is valued at more than $15 million. It also says here that you have been featured in Forbes and TechCrunch as one of the top 30 innovators under 30. You've delivered keynote speeches at leading industry conferences." She lowered the phone, her eyes shining with amazement. "Emily, this is extraordinary. Why did no one tell me? Why didn't you say anything?" I gave a slight shrug, a tiny gesture that felt like a huge step in that moment. The mood in the room was tense. What could I say? That my family had skillfully crafted an image of me as a clueless wanderer? That my achievements were inconvenient facts that disrupted their preferred storyline? "It simply never came up," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. The remainder of the dinner was filled with intense awkwardness. Mom made a brave, though awkward, attempt to fix the situation. "Well, you know how these internet things are," she stammered, trying for a light laugh that ended up sounding forced and strained. "It is all quite modern. Not exactly a stable career, is it? So unpredictable." Her eyes silently begged me to agree to help her restore the comforting fiction. I offered no such assistance. I just stared back at her. Dad cleared his throat several times, avoiding my gaze. He tried to shift the topic back to politics, but his usual booming confidence was missing. His statements felt empty, his eyes doubtful. Jake was the most visibly disturbed. He kept looking at me, then at Grace, then back at me, his face marked by a confused expression. The golden child seemed tarnished. It was as though he was seeing his younger sister for the very first time, not as the quiet family accessory, but as an independent, accomplished person. The person he thought he knew, the one who was always just Courtney, had been a carefully curated character, a story shaped by others. But Grace truly was a breath of fresh air. She was sincerely intrigued. The barrier of polite reservation had finally collapsed, and she had so many thoughtful questions, genuine questions filled with respect. "How did you even come up with the idea for ClickSmart?" she asked, leaning forward. Her earlier polite interest had transformed into intense curiosity. I explained that we had built the company to a valuation of $15 million. That was just incredible. She wanted to know what had been the biggest obstacle along the way. For the first time at a Johnson family dinner, I truly spoke. I shared the spark that ignited the idea, a frustration with inefficient online retail logistics that I realized I could fix. I recounted the late nights, the nonstop coding marathons, and the daunting choice of leaving my stable but unsatisfying junior developer role to follow my own dream. I described the excitement of landing our first major client, the anxiety of managing finances, and the happiness of watching my team expand. I talked about the complex algorithms we had created and the user interface I had become obsessed with. I explained the business problems we were addressing. As I spoke, I sensed the mood around the table changing. Mom was quiet, poking at her meal, her face revealing a swirl of emotions that were hard to decipher. Dad listened carefully, his head tilted, his expression oddly unreadable. Was it reluctant admiration or confusion? Jake remained silent but clearly attentive, his initial shock turning into deep reflection. Grace was an excellent listener, asking follow-up questions, nodding eagerly, and genuinely impressed not only by the numbers but by the entire journey. The determination. "That must have been incredibly stressful," she would say. Or, "How did you manage to keep going when everything got difficult?" It felt freeing. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking away. I was growing, occupying the space that had always been denied to me. When dinner finally came to a merciful end, the tension had not completely vanished, but it had shifted. It was no longer the familiar dismissal directed at me, but an uncomfortable recognition. As Grace and Jake prepared to leave, Grace embraced me warmly. "It was truly wonderful to finally meet you properly, Emily," she said, her eyes still sparkling. "We definitely need to keep in touch. I am so intrigued by what you do." Jake lingered a moment after Grace stepped outside. "Emily," he said quietly, almost hesitant, "that is pretty remarkable, ClickSmart." "I had no clue." I replied clearly, neither harsh nor indulgent, making sure he understood. Later that night, as I helped Karen clear the last of the dishes, a task I usually performed in silence, my parents decided to speak up. It was a classic moment in the living room. "Emily," Mom began with a voice softer than I had heard in years, carrying an unusual uncertainty. Your father and we were just wondering, why did you never tell us about all of this? The company, Forbes, everything?" I looked from her to my father, who nodded in agreement, his look sincere and slightly confused. Tell them, I thought. Had I not tried so many times? "Tell you what, Mom," I asked calmly. "Remember when I explained my business plan 5 years ago, and you said it sounded more like a pleasant pastime. You suggested I should really consider finding a stable job, perhaps in teaching or something similar. When I mentioned the first major investor meeting, Dad asked if Jake needed new tires for his car. My tone was not blaming, just straightforward. The memories remained clear, not faded by time. We simply did not comprehend. Dad muttered while staring at his hands, "It's all this new computer stuff, nothing like what our generation faced." "It is not about knowing every detail, Dad," I said softly. "It is about listening, about having faith that maybe, just maybe, your daughter was not just pretending." Mom had tears in her eyes and quietly said, "We are very proud of you, dear." Of course we are. We just did not express it well. Was it pride, or the shock of realizing that the daughter they had so often underestimated was now recognized by external standards, such as money, acknowledgement from respected magazines, true success? Was it pride in me or shame at their own blindness? I could not tell. The drive back to Dillon felt different that evening. The city lights appeared more vivid, and the usual noise of traffic was less harsh. I felt lighter, not because I finally earned their approval, I had stopped seeking that long ago, but because the truth was revealed, not dragged out by me begging for recognition, but uncovered by an impartial outsider through a simple online search. There was a certain poetic justice in that, much later on. Near midnight, my phone vibrated. A message from Jake saying, "Hey, Emily. Grace was genuinely impressed tonight. She really loves the startup world. In fact, she mentioned she knows some venture capitalists who might be interested in ClickSmart's upcoming funding round. Would you be open to an introduction?" This could be huge. I read the text twice. An introduction from Jake arranged by Grace. The brother who had barely known what I did for a job just hours earlier was now offering to link me with investors. The irony was so strong, it felt almost tangible. This wasn't about my potential anymore. It was about my established success. A success he suddenly wanted to be connected to, maybe even benefit from. I reflected on all the moments when I could have used his encouragement, his faith, or simply his interest. All the years I had faced the challenging path of entrepreneurship by myself, while he enjoyed the steady praise of family approval. I wrote a brief response. "Thanks, Jake, but I'm good. My current investors are great, and we have the next round planned." I pressed send before doubt could creep in. This was not about bitterness. It was about protecting myself, about understanding that some doors once closed don't need to be opened again, just because someone finally sees their value. Lying in bed that night, I replayed the evening. The initial sting of Mom's casual rejection, the sudden surprising revelation, the shocked expressions, Grace's sincere excitement, and my parents' awkwardness. Attempts at reconciliation were Jake's. I did not attend that dinner looking for a dramatic showdown. I expected more of the usual. However, life sometimes unfolds in unexpected ways. I did not have to raise my voice, list my achievements, or demand their respect. The truth simply entered the room, took a seat at the table, and introduced itself quietly. That was, in its subtle manner, the most significant triumph of all. My value was never dependent on their recognition of it. I had constructed my world, my success, brick by brick, amid their silence and disregard. And tonight, the lights finally came on in that room, not because of me, but for everyone there to witness. If this story strikes a chord with you, if you have ever been underestimated, overlooked, or ridiculed, remember this: your worth is beyond question. It exists within you inherently. It belongs to you. Like this video, subscribe, and share in the comments how you have proven others wrong or how you intend to do so. Our stories and our truths need to be acknowledged and celebrated.